discussing about an interesting and important concept in human physiology with respect to circulatory system, that is cardiac cycle. So most of the students find it difficult to understand exactly at the school level concepts of what are the various events that happens in cardiac cycle and exactly what cardiac cycle is. So I thought this video might help them to have a clear cut understanding. Right. So before which we move to the cardiac cycle, we have to know the basic anatomy of heart. Hope everyone should be aware of it. So heart is made up of basically two chambers. So the upper chamber is what is called as atrium, of which you have two different. There is one left and other one is right. So I call this as the right atrium and this as the left atrium and this as the right ventricle and this as the left ventricle. Right. So basically the heart diagram what I have drawn here has got a four different chambers. So upper two chamber, lower two chamber. And to add a little bit of the circulation that is happening here, the deoxygenated blood, there is impure blood. Okay. So comes to right atrium, again to right ventricle, from there it goes to lungs, where the exchange of gases at alveoli happens, which we technically call as blood purification and lungs. So the impure blood becomes pure blood, that is deoxygenated blood becomes oxygenated blood. Again it comes back to left atrium, to left ventricle, and there is a big trunk artery which arises, which is called as aorta, through which the blood will be supplied to each and every part of the body. So this is the basic circulation. Hope everyone should be aware of it. Right. So coming to here, now what is this cardiac cycle? So cardiac cycle is typically related to something called as heartbeat. Okay, heartbeat is cardiac cycle. So if you all know what heartbeat is, the rhythmic contraction of heart, இதய துடிப்பு, in our language Tamil, we need to say இதய துடிப்பு. So heartbeat. So heart, say for example, if I consider this particular fist as a heart, okay, this has to contract, relax. Contract, relax, contract, relax. So there are two phases. So one is going to be the phase of contraction, phase of relaxation. Phase of contraction, phase of relaxation. Either if it is going to be in phase of contraction alone or phase of relaxation alone, then the heart is technically not beating. Okay, so what is called as, we call it as a cardiac arrest, and the person is actually dead. So this is what is heartbeat. So we mean it has got two different phases. So one is the phase of contraction and the other one is phase of relaxation. Right. So the question is, in previous some years movie, that is some 20 decades before, there are some 1 or 2, 3 movies which will show, in which the heartbeat will be shown where the entire heart together contract and together relax. So technically that is not going to happen. That way it is not going to happen. Okay. So here the contraction means, see, if in case we can divide this broadly into two chambers, the upper atrium, lower ventricle. If the atrium is going to contract, the ventricle should be in relaxed phase. If ventricle is going to contract, atrium should be in relaxed phase. You're getting the point? So I'm writing it here. So then in this contraction, if ventricular is going to contract, atrium should be relaxed. VCAR. If ventricular is going to relax, atrium should be in contract phase. So by which you don't see the entire heart together in the contraction phase. But on the other hand, when the ventricle is relaxed, atrium can also be relaxed. So this is permitted. What is this? So this is one particular phase where the entire heart, both atrium as well as ventricle together, it will be in a relaxed phase. Getting the point? So, and moreover, technically, this contraction, the word contraction, for the word contraction, the scientific word what we use is systole. And for the word relaxation, scientific use what we use is diastole. So here, if I say ventricular contraction, I mean ventricular systole, atrial diastole, ventricular diastole, atrial systole. So both here we are ventricular systole, ventricular diastole as well as atrial diastole, both at the same time. I said relaxation can happen with atrium and ventricle at the same time, but not systole, right? So this is what is called as common diastolic phase. Okay, common diastolic phase, which is also called as diastasis. Right? So these are the basic things that we need to understand before entering into the details of cardiac cycle. So to summarize, heartbeat, contraction, relaxation. So contraction is also technically referred as systole, and relaxation is also technically referred as diastole. So the point is heart on the whole. So heart is basically divided into two, it is both chambered but upper, lower, atrium, ventricle. So I consider for the sake of discussion as two chamber. Heart will not be in the phase of systole on the whole. So in case if atrium is in systole, ventricle should be in diastole. So ventricle is in systole, atrium should be in diastole. Right? But both can be in common diastolic phase, which is what is called as I have mentioned here, which is what is called as diastasis. Fine. So these are all the basics. Now, this might take you to the thinking that heartbeat is not going to be simple, because you have got ventricular systole, ventricular diastole, all these things should happen, right? So, what is then the difference between heartbeat and cardiac cycle? Say for example, there is a function at your home or a school or office, wherever. So a function on whole, say that is considered as an annual day function. So each and every function has got an event, say prayer, addressed by the chief guest, cultural program, then prize distribution, then vote of thanks, dinner. So the entire program has got these many events. Likewise, heartbeat is an event in which it has got different. Heartbeat is a program, not an event. It is a program in which it has got different events like ventricular systole, ventricular diastole, atrial systole, atrial diastole. So when you combine these two, all these events, okay, ultimately that results in the program what is called as heartbeat. So how do you define cardiac cycle? Cardiac cycle is the sequence of the event should happen in a sequence. The very sequence of events happening in a single heartbeat is what is called as cardiac cycle. So cardiac cycle is that particular sequence of events, whereas your heartbeat is going to be the final output. And all the heart is pumping. So why is this heartbeat important? The heartbeat is important because it is the heartbeat that that propels the blood through the blood vessels, due to which we are all alive. So in case if a person fails to have the heartbeat, then we claim that that person has got a cardiac arrest and he is totally dead. I hope you have got things clear until now. Talk until now. Right. So with this, so let me first consider ventricular system. And before getting into this ventricular system and all those stuff, see, if you take ventricle, so this ventricle should either be in systolic phase or in diastolic. It has got two options, either to be in relaxed form or to be in contract form. So in case if it is going to be systolic phase, means it is the blood filling phase. Okay, it is the blood filling phase. So in diastolic form, technically the chamber gets filled with blood, and whatever blood it gets filled with will be ejected to the next stage, okay, next part in the systolic phase. So this is going to be the blood ejection phase, right? So blood filling phase and blood ejection phase. So this has to be understood. So it is not only with ventricle, both with atrium. Okay. So diastole means it is relaxed. So it will keep receiving the blood from the previous part. So when it has received the blood, so next event is it has to be systole. So it will try to eject the blood to the next part. Okay. The circulatory pathway. So this is the case. So let me start with ventricular systole. Let me start with ventricular systole. Now, before this, when the ventricle is in systole, atrium should be in diastole. This is understood, right? Because both cannot be in systolic phase together. And before this ventricular systole, the ventricle should have been in diastole, right? Before this, the ventricle should have been diastole, so in which should have received the blood from atrium. Now, when the ventricle is about to start here, the ventricle is completely filled with blood. So here's the case. So it should have received the blood from here, right? So this ventricle is completely filled with blood. Now, when the ventricle contract, so assume that you have got a rubber tube in which you have filled it with some fluid, and you have to exert the pressure. The fluid will try to escape through somewhere. If there is no point through which it can escape, the tube ultimately gets burst. So that's the same case here. So the ventricle is about to contract. The blood will try to escape because there is pressure, significant pressure that the ventricle is going to exert on the blood that is present inside the ventricle. So the blood has got two ways here. One is there is going to be a bicuspid tricuspid wall, right, in the AV membrane. So and you know that those doesn't encourage or allow the flow of blood from ventricle to atrium. So that's the reason why we say valves prevent the backflow of blood. Okay, so the very purpose of the AV valves, bicuspid, tricuspid, or bicuspid is called as the mitral valve, is it allows the blood only from atrium to ventricle, not the other way. Right? So then the one option is from right ventricle there is going to be an artery called as pulmonary artery, and here is going to be aorta. So through this, the blood reaches from right ventricle to lungs through pulmonary artery, and from left ventricle to it will reach the different part of the body through aorta. So this is the concept. So what happens when the ventricle is about to contract? The first thing is, okay, the ventricle is completely filled with blood. The pressure in the ventricle, the pressure that the blood is going to experience in the ventricle will increase. So blood tries to escape. Well, there are two things. One is AV and bicuspid and tricuspid valve, and this aortic semilunar valve. So as I said, the AV valve doesn't allow the backflow of blood, so the blood has to flow only through the pulmonary artery and aorta. So blood escapes to the respective places. I hope you are clear. So this completes the ventricular systole, because ventricle has done its job now, right, pushing the blood to the respective places. Right. So now, once the ventricle systole is done, so what is the next phase of ventricle? So after being in systole, the ventricle has to be in diastole, right? Ventricle has to be in diastolic phase. Now, atrium being in diastole, now it has to come to systolic phase, obviously. But what happens is, the atrium diastole still maintain, right? The atrium diastolic phase still maintains. So this is what we call it as a common diastolic phase. The important point here. So as ventricle comes to diastolic phase from systolic phase, atrium also doesn't do the same way. Atrium still maintains the diastolic phase, right? So consider this atrial diastolic phase. What should have happened in this phase? It is the phase of relaxation, so obviously it should have received the blood. I have already asked you, explained you. Diastolic phase is the blood filling phase. Systolic phase is the blood ejection phase. Now the atrium is completely filled with blood. The diastolic phase. Now you can't, now with this idea, you just consider this particular phase where ventricle has just now come to diastolic phase, which means the ventricle should be empty totally, because whatever bit it had just given to the respective places during this ventricular systole. Now the atrium is also in diastole, which means that the atrium is also filled with blood, but ventricle is empty. Now what happens? This is going to exert a pressure on the valves which is present here. This here is going to be the tricuspid valve, and here is going to be the bicuspid valve. It's going to exert the pressure. You can imagine that. Through which what happens? Okay, 70% of the blood will get leaked from atrium to ventricle. Okay, atrium to ventricle. So we call this as the blood leakage. We call this as the blood leakage. So how much percentage? It is almost 70% of the blood gets leaked in this phase from atrium to ventricle. This is mainly, see, actually the valves are made to open due to the pressure difference in the blood in atrium and ventricle. So atrium is totally empty. Sorry, ventricle is totally empty. Atrium is completely filled with blood. So obviously the blood here will try to exert a pressure on the valves, make the valve to slightly open, so that we call it as a leakage through which the blood enters from atrium to ventricle. So 70%. Now the ventricle, okay, still continues in diastole. Okay, ventricle, because ventricle cannot shift to systole. Why? The atrium has to come to systole, because atrium is still in diastole. Our question is, sir, already the blood has 70% as blood has got filled, then why should we, what is the need for the atrium to get into the systolic phase? You might ask, but still remaining 30% of the blood is there, which is very significant, right? So ventricle still remains in diastole, right? And atrial will move to systole. Now systole is the phase of contraction. Now atrium will contract, pushing remaining 30% of blood into the ventricle. Right? Now again this ventricular systole will start. So this is what is cardiac cycle. Right? So this might be this might look like there's a lot of information, but if you think calmly and if you summarize what has been given here, the process will be very, very simple and easy to understand, right? So actually cardiac cycle, lots and lots of further technical details are all there. So all those things will be dealt by people pursuing their education and medical field. So for us to have just basic idea, systole, diastole, right? So what is the heart doesn't get in the systolic phase together, okay, but in diastolic phase together. So what is the systolic phase? What is the diastolic phase? It's such basic idea. And what is the sequence here? What is the blood leakage? So getting the information regarding these things will be right, at this stage, right? So if you have any doubts regarding these details, you can kindly mail me or give me in the comment section, or if you have any concepts to be dealt in this through any video or something, you can give me those details. I'll be happy to give you a video lecture on that. Thank you so much for watching.